Hi everyone, I'm Lynne Richmond, Communications and Public Affairs Coordinator for the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. We're here live from the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Past Forward Conference in San Francisco. Welcome. And today we are going to be talking to Theresa Pasqual, the former Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Acoma, Pueblo in New Mexico. And she's here with us today to talk about Native American Heritage Month, which we've been celebrating the whole month of November. So, Theresa, tell me, why is commemorating Native American Heritage Month important?
I think it's important, one, because we are able to talk about tribal communities across this country as living communities and not something that is relegated to the past, that we can actually talk about the living descendants of many of these ancestral communities that we maybe perhaps go visit in terms of parks or read about in history books, and we can actually celebrate their diversity and their richness of culture as living communities in the very present.
Now, where do Native American fit in the historic preservation community?
Sure. So many communities, tribal communities across the country have now proposed and developed historic preservation programs. And oftentimes what results out of those programs is the development of TIPO offices. And these TIPO offices, or cultural resource management programs, are integral in terms of preserving our cultural heritage, telling our narratives, and getting those included in the development plans that allow us to protect and preserve many of these places across the country. A lot of what we have in terms of the United States is the history of structures, of buildings, but having these cultural resource programs, these historic preservation programs that are part of the tribal communities, allows for a different narrative and different types of resources and landscapes to become part of that understanding of our knowledge of this country and the history, and allow for some really rich and diverse conversations about how to protect some of those resources that might not be so easily fitted within the existing construct of preservation law.
Right. I mean, that really brings up, why is it important to preserve the Native American Indian tribes' history? Why is it important to pretty much anybody?
Well, first of all, there are communities like mine who maintain their history and connection to place through our oral traditions. And I have often said, as an advisor to the National Trust, that many of these histories are contained within the landscape. And so when we destroy that landscape or somehow change it through development and the cumulative impacts that come from that development, we have inadvertently destroyed those pages of the history book. You cannot replace those landscapes. And so therefore communities like mine that have and maintain those histories orally can no longer take their community members, can no longer take their children and grandchildren to those places. So that's why protecting that particular component is important. But secondly, it's important to all Americans across the United States to protect that heritage, because it is a diverse and rich heritage, and it is part of our story as shared citizens of the United States. And that history is part of the American story, and we really should all work to protect and preserve it.
Now, what advice do you have for Indian tribes interested in getting involved in historic preservation?
I would recommend to any tribes who are considering getting involved in historic preservation is, one, talk internally about developing a plan, a preservation plan. In some instances, communities may be doing development of ordinances and specific laws to protect the cultural resources that are important to them. Consider establishing a tribal historic preservation office. Education of folks in fields that are important to supporting that office, whether they're history majors, English majors, curators, or anthropologists. There are a whole host of fields that can support and help fulfill the responsibilities of a historic preservation office. As well as elevating the resources and values of our cultural elders who are an integral part of these programs. And finally, I would say for communities, really invest in your language programs. That traditional language programs, preservation and revitalization programs are a very key component to preserving our oral history. Without those languages, we lose the ties to place and our understanding of the world in which we exist. So there are a myriad of ways in which tribal communities can get involved and just do and work in historic preservation.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Theresa Pasqual. Again, we're here in San Francisco at the National Trust for Historic Preservation Conference, Past Forward. If you want to know more about the ACHP's involvement with Native Americans, we have an Office of Native American Affairs. You can go to www.achp.gov and go to our website and find more information. Again, thank you so much for joining us live today.